Music on Black Power 96, and we just concluded the Jazz Zone with Tea and Providence. And joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne, the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. And his most recent book is The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. And we are going to kick it about a number of issues today. And first of all, how are you doing today, sir?
Hey, it's all good. How about you all?
Well, I'm pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good. I don't know about Melinda, has to speak for herself.
Yeah, no, it was great. It's really beautiful weather, like compared to yesterday. So sun's out. So yeah, it's a good day.
So I guess we wanted to talk about the fact that there was a love fest, I guess, yesterday between, first of all, President Joe Biden. What his name is? Joe H. Biden Jr. came to Ottawa. I think he only spent 27 hours here, and he brought his whole entourage, his wife, and they had they basically had like a love fest. But the two things they talked about that really struck me was they're all promoting the love-in with the Ukraine, with the right wing in Ukraine, and they are on the question of Haiti. Joe Biden actually came up here calling for boots on the ground in Haiti, and Trudeau basically, I guess the compromise Trudeau made was, they would send, I guess, help for the police and give them some surveillance, nothing militarily. They would just basically, watch. You know what I mean? Just they won't. No boots on the ground. Basically, was the point. And basically, it was he came up and had everybody laughing about the whole hockey situation, and he had a couple of blunders, real serious blunders when he tried to recite a poem by somebody, and he really came across like he was a 80-year-old man. It was kind of sad watching him. He didn't have a senior moment. He had a senior seemed like a senior hour. You know what I mean? He really lost it. You remember that? Did you catch that, Melinda?
Yeah, but he I mean, that's like he has like those moments in every speech.
All the time.
Yeah, that's Joe Biden. So also, I noticed. I kind of also like there's in Canada there has been sort of China intervening in our elections. What's interesting to me is that they're pointed to China. Meanwhile, they are still talking about the ultra right taking over Parliament Hill. But it seems like they're all focused all in on China, but forgetting who's actually intervening into elections. So that was interesting to me, anyway. And then also, their partnership with the situation in Haiti is also kind of the elephant in the room, which nobody really talks about.
How much publicity did it get in the United States, Dr. Horne?
Well, as you know, when Mr. Biden travels outside of the United States, there is a delegation of journalists who travel alongside him, journalists from the United States, I should say. And as a result, the visit to Ottawa received publicity. I can't say it received that much publicity. One gaffe was played that I saw, I can't remember the outlet, where he accidentally spoke of China when I think he was supposed to be speaking of Canada.
Yes,
and he said something like, that shows what's on my mind. And certainly China is weighing heavily on the mind of many in this country. Indeed, one of the issues that unites the two major parties, speaking of the Democrats and Republicans, is this bipartisan hysteria about China. It came up this week during the hearings, focused on TikTok, the social app, which claims that 150 million US nationals use this app. This is out of a population of 330 million. Both parties are charging that this is an app that the Chinese Communist Party can access and have full access to the silly cat videos and silly dances that are the stock and trade of TikTok. But I think it's a reflection of this hysteria, and hysteria received a fever pitch earlier in the week when President Xi Jinping of China showed up in Moscow for a 3-day summit with Mr. Putin. Now, it's understandable why there is hysteria, because the Chinese and Russian economies have a complementary nature. That is to say, Russia produces agricultural commodities, natural gas, petroleum. China has a manufacturing capability that is larger than that of the United States and Europe combined. And therefore, you can expect closer relations. And as well, of late, there's been, at least in the New York Times, much more critical reporting of the escapade in Ukraine. This morning, for example, there's talk about these U.S. volunteers who went to Ukraine to fight, including the Black American Malcolm Nance, who is a fixture on MSNBC, the cable channel, who turns out to be something of a grifter, I'm afraid to say. And he is not alone. Sorry, did you have an interjection?
No. I had an interjection before, but I just want to say that Justin Trudeau, took his children off of TikTok. He made a big deal about that.
Oh, I see. Well, okay. That means that I guess the Chinese Communist Party does not have access to Justin's children now. That shows he's a responsible parent. But
yes, sir.
But in any case, there was another article about how the United States is not able to produce enough military materiel to supply the Ukrainian forces, whereby as a legacy of the Soviet era, you have a state-controlled military-industrial complex in Russia that now is being backed up by China's military-industrial complex. And there's been a lot of hysteria of late about the Chinese building up their Navy, which is a direct challenge to the U.S. Navy. So there is a real fear that the curtain is coming down on the epic that has governed us. Some would say since World War II, with the United States emerging triumphant after that titanic conflict. Others would say since 1492. And that given the stakes, it's understandable why there's this hysteria. And interestingly enough, in the next few days, expect President Macron and Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain to jet to China. Mr. Macron says that he's going to try to save China from the clutches of Russia. When actually, that's sort of ridiculous. He's going because he wants to cut deals with China, basically. And that's not good news for U.S. imperialism. And this brings me to the other point, which is that Mr. Trump feels that the United States should focus like a laser beam on China, and he's willing to give Russia a pass. The Democrats want to focus on both Russia and China. And I have to say that I think that's a bit more dangerous. And it's difficult to say because I've noticed a trend in the anti-war movement in Europe where they've turned on its head the usual issue of the US left, which suggests that the Democrats are the lesser of two evils when it comes to comparing them to the Republicans. Many in the US and the EU left say that the Republicans under Trump are the lesser of two evils, since they only want to fight one war. The Democrats want to fight two. So it's a very perilous situation, and it's made even more complicated. To make a personal note, is that one of the things I've noticed on a personal level, I do these interviews on KPFK Pacifica Los Angeles, 11 a.m. Pacific, kpfk.org for the audio archives. And I can't tell you the number of people who have turned me down for interviews. And I was thinking to myself that if I wasn't me, I'd probably turn myself down for an interview, because I think these folks are afraid of a backlash from the ruling class of dealing with a person thought to be seditious, meaning myself. And they don't want to have anything to do with that. But then obviously that complicates the ability to have any sort of united anti-fascist front or any sort of progressive movement, for that matter, insofar as people are depriving themselves of a media megaphone because they fear that it might upset the ruling class. It's a rather lamentable state of affairs, I must say.
How you talk about our friends on the left, and how has the our nationalistic friends, how have they responded to the whole question of the question that we're talking about now?
Well, it's rather lamentable. I'm not even sure they're aware of what's going on. What's your assessment?
I don't know. I mean, I've talked to you have revolutionary nationalists, and you have the cultural nationalists, and some of the revolutionary nationalists are taking a position similar to yours, but then some of I've mentioned several times. Some of the nationalists are taking the position that it has nothing to do with black people. So we shouldn't even discuss it, which is we've already concluded that that's basically madness.
Well, I'll make this point with regard to the left. As you know, there is a section of the left that supports the Ukraine and its conflict with Russia. And as I've said before,
yes,
they tend to have tunnel vision. They don't necessarily want to talk about the position of the global South or the position of South Africa. And there's a news service whose name I will not mention that I've been subscribing to for years that's put together by folks on the left. Many of them would consider themselves to be, quote, Marxist, unquote. And here you had this visit of President Xi to Moscow, one of the most significant events in recent times that may be, as I suggested, inaugurating an entirely new historical epic. And they've had nothing to say about it so far, because I think that they're conflicted. That's the best case scenario, best case explanation, in the sense that they don't want to be perceived as going against China, because many of these people were former communists, many of them are former Maoists. And so they don't say anything, which I think is somewhat irresponsible, because how are you going to purport to lead the masses and educate the masses if you're silent about important events? I mean, that's an abdication of leadership, in my estimation.
I would say ditto to that. Lula is heading to China. Or did Melinda have something you want to say?
No, that's what I was going to say when I was moving it along to Lula.
Yeah, he's going to stay there 5 days. And it's interesting. I don't think Macron is going to stay there for 5 days. They're going to get him in and out quickly. But Lula's trip bespeaks the fact that China, despite the fact that the United States is closer to Brazil, but China is Brazil's major trading partner. China and Brazil are yoked together in BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, which is threatening the hegemony of the Group of Seven led by the United States, including Canada, Japan, and the Western European pirates, such as London, Paris, and Berlin, and Rome. And likewise, you see that China and Russia had developed a counterpoint to the US-dominated NATO, speaking of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has co-opted into its ranks both India and Iran. And so it's difficult to escape the point that a new world order is in motion. And what I find remarkable is that you have nations like Japan, which was subjected to an atomic bombing in 1945, but now is all on board with regard to U.S. imperialism. You saw the prime minister show up in Kiev earlier this week. Japan is increasing its military budget, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, and as we all knew in any case. And this is supposedly aimed at North Korea and China. But I think what Washington should begin to contemplate is whether or not their well-wrought plans will be executed. What I mean is that you have the leader of Taiwan heading to California rather shortly to confer with Speaker McCarthy, who is behind Kamala Harris in terms of the line of succession to the White House. At the same time, you have the leader of the opposition, the KMT, which you may recall ruled China for a good deal of the post-1949 period. He's going to be in China for 12 days. And so what I'm trying to intimate is that Washington should be concerned because Washington is arming Taiwan to the teeth. But with elections coming up in Taiwan and unhappiness with the current leader, the KMT could come back to power and broker a renewed relationship with Beijing, which would be another game changer. And speaking of game changing, Washington thought that the sanctions against Russia would collapse the Russian economy. But what you see is a banking crisis in the United States, and stay tuned for what happens next week with regard to this crisis, a banking crisis in Europe, not only in Switzerland, but in Germany, the locomotive of the European Union. Watch what happens to Deutsche Bank. Likewise, Washington thought that it could start a brush fire that could consume Russia with a proxy war in Ukraine. But once again, watch what's going to unfold in the next week or so in Syria, where the United States has an unwanted presence and where they're coming into conflict in terms of shooting, bombings, and the like with various forces that Washington claims are tied to Iran. And given the recent entente brokered between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered by China, that is to say, it's difficult to see how Saudi Arabia is now going to enlist in this anti-Iran campaign unfolding on Syrian territory. At the same time, Israel, the close ally of Washington, is in turmoil. The latest news is that Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has fired the defense minister because the defense minister expressed reservations about Netanyahu's attempt to clip the wings of the Israeli Supreme Court, which would give much more power and influence to the right wing in Israel. And in any case, this particular maneuver by Israel is causing criticism to emerge from quarters that are surprising, such as the United Arab Emirates, to name one amongst many. So the international situation becomes ever more complex and ever more complicated. The problem is, at least on these shores, we don't have enough individuals, organizations, and intellectuals paying attention, which means that some of us may be due for a rude surprise.
What do you think about the Vice President of the United States, Mrs. Harris, going to her visit to Ghana? You know, her father was a member of the, well, a Jamaican father was a member of the, I guess, Donald Warden's organization. Donald Warden, a lawyer. He had changed his name. He was Muslim when he passed away, but he had a very black nationalist group in the Bay Area. And Kamala Harris's father was a member of that group, and her father is still a Marxist-Leninist, as far as I know. And she's gone to Ghana. What do you think? What is that? What are the ramifications of that? Oh, she's also going to, I think, Tanzania and Malawi, I believe. After that,
Zambia,
pardon me.
Well, Zambia, let me talk about that. Zambia is key. You have a number of U.S. officials showing up in Zambia lately, particularly Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen. I think this is so for a number of reasons. One, Zambia borders Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe, as you know, is not considered a comrade and friend of the North Atlantic countries. Likewise, there is really concern in the North Atlantic countries about South Africa, particularly the fact that Mr. Putin is due in South Africa in a few months for the BRICS meeting. There's pressure on South Africa to arrest him as soon as he lands. South Africa said it will not do so, but the pressure will intensify. There's concern about these military maneuvers the South African military had with Russia and China off the coast of South Africa. And so Washington is looking for a base of subversion against Zimbabwe and South Africa, and perhaps they feel that Zambia may play that role. Point number two is copper. Zambia is a major producer of cotton. Excuse me, I meant to say copper, which is important to the green economy. The use of copper is expected to go up by a third within 2 decades or so. And that's going to also involve the increase in the price of copper, which the United States would like to suppress because the United States uses quite a bit of copper. And so they'll be trying to twist arms in Lusaka in that regard. So keep your eye on Zambia. But the larger context is the growing concern about the role of China and Russia and also Turkey in Africa. And let me issue a footnote here. This is a self-criticism. I finally got around to reading an 800-page dissertation on Deuce Muhammad Ali, born in Egypt circa 1866, passing away in West Africa in 1945, an influence on Marcus Garvey, crossed swords with W.E.B. Du Bois, spent a lot of time in Detroit, in St. Louis, in the run-up to the founding of the Nation of Islam approximately 90 odd years ago. And one of the takeaways from this dissertation was that D. Muhammad Ali, like many Muslims and many Egyptians, he wore this fez, the sort of small cap on his head.
Like Noble Drew Ali's people like
Exactly. And then he was also thought to be an influence on Noble Drew Ali. And you come away from this dissertation with this idea that, as I've said before, many Black people could escape in the United States the kind of attacks that Black Americans were subjected to by not speaking English, by wearing a fez, etc. And so you can see how organizations would emerge that would seek to identify with non-Black American formations. And I recommend this dissertation. You can find it online, although it's heavy sledding in terms of reading. The author is Ian, I-A-N Duffield, D-U-F-F-I-E-L-D. It came out in 1971. But in any case, back to the thread, there is a fear in Washington, as the saying goes, that the people you meet on your way up, you'll meet on your way down. And what I mean by that is that the North Atlantic countries, they rose to prominence through the shameless and crude exploitation of Africa. And now, with China apparently in the passing lane, and China becoming a major trading partner of many African nations, there's this fear that U.S. decline will be accompanied by a decline in its ties to Africa as they are supplanted by China, hence these trips of Vice President Harris to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia, Secretary Blinken to Niger and Ethiopia. And I should also mention that in the Gulf of Guinea, not far distant from the shores of Ghana, you've had U.S. military maneuvers for the past few days, supposedly about concern regarding religious insurgencies, Boko Haram, for example, and their comrades. But others have other ideas.
Well, let me say that if you go to Google Images and you put in vocal group The Turks, you'll see a picture of a group called The Turks. One of the members was Jesse Belvin, the late, great Jesse Belvin, and they all had on fezzes. This is in the late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, they had on, I don't know what color they were. It's probably color. If they colorize, it's probably red, but the pictures at that time were black and white, colorized. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. But The Turks, the name of that group. I don't know if they did. You cheated, you lied. I don't know if they sang that particular song, but the late Jesse Belvin, listeners of Diasporic music would know about Jesse Belvin. I think that was one of the first songs we ever played on this station was Jesse Belvin.
Oh, right on.
Do we want to, before we run out of time, do we want to go to ICC and Putin?
Well, yes. The International Criminal Court, which we had thought was obsessed with investigating leaders from Africa and occasionally those from formerly socialist Yugoslavia, are now saying that they want to prosecute the president of Russia. Interestingly enough, they made this announcement on the 20th anniversary of the unauthorized U.S. invasion and overthrow of the government in Iraq, assisted by, of course, Tony Blair, prosecuted by U.S. President George Bush. And of course, there's no ICC prosecution of those leaders. And in any case, with regard to the heart of the matter, Russia's claim is that the charge that they are stealing Ukrainian children is misleading at best, because their argument is that the territory from which these children emerge is actually Russian territory, and that the parents have passed on, and the children are orphans, and therefore they're dispersing them into Russian families. Well, that's an argument that the ICC is not courting or is not taking cognizance of. And I think it leads to this feeling amongst the Trump Republicans that the current administration is so obsessed with Russia that it's distracting from what they consider to be the big prize, the big enchilada, which is the People's Republic of China. And once again, our friends on the left, many of our friends in the Black community, they have no insight. They're not providing leadership, intellectual, political, or otherwise on this matter.
And we have a few seconds left, about 2 minutes left. I wanted to get your thoughts on the World Baseball Classic with your man, the pitcher, the Otani. Is it Otani?
Correct.
Otani is can pitch like Sandy Koufax and hit like Hank Aaron, and I think they won because I guess the last out was he struck out. Otani struck out Mike Trout, I believe. Trout is one of the greatest baseball players alive, but he's never won any awards. But I guess because he's always been never been on a good team. What are your thoughts on that baseball classic?
Well, it was a classic confrontation, made even more dramatic by the fact that Otani and Trout are both with the California Angels, or I should say, the Los Angeles Angels at Anaheim. And why they have that tongue-twisting name is a subject for another day. But in any case, another headline emerging from the World Baseball Championships, particularly when the games were played in Miami, was the abuse heaped up on the Cuban team. It was quite ugly. Quite ugly, and a very ominous sign. As I wrote a friend this morning suggesting that there are those in the U.S. ruling class who are really concerned about the rise of this fascist movement embodied in the Trump forces. But of course, they have no explanation for why that might be so, and certainly no prescription as to what to do about it. And then you have folks on the left who are in a similar category. And plus you have people on the left in the United States, believe it or not, they're so upset with the Democrats that they're willing to share a trench with the Trump Republicans. And these are people who consider themselves part of the left. They just feel, I guess, that it shakes up the system, or perhaps they feel that the January 6th insurrectionists, that they are treated badly, and that this is a precedent for how left-wing people might be treated, which I think is spurious and specious reasoning. But in any case, the takeaway is the ideological confusion in the United States of America. And I say to the folks in Canada that if your neighbor's house is aflame, which is the case in the United States, do not feel that you can escape unharmed, that you have a stake in what goes on south of the border.
I would say ditto to that. And I guess with that, we're going to have to let you go, sir.
Right on.
And we have been speaking with Dr. Gerald Horne of the University of Houston. Anything you would like to add, Melinda? Or I guess we'd like to thank Lisa Watson for checking, as usual, doing a brilliant job. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Melinda?
We'll see everybody in the world next week and walk good.
All right, good luck.
All right, take care.